chapter 10. There we go. All right, chapter 10. Ekman, Sorensen, and Friesen in 1969 proposed that there is a set of basic emotions that are universally recognized around the world. So no matter where you go, if somebody smiles, that means happy. If you're looking like these two individuals, you can see her dimples. That's anger. That's happy. That's sad. That's scared. That's surprised. That's disgusted. Okay, this is not universal. This is not a universal, but it's very common in the Western world, and that's contempt. Is it universal or not? Probably not. This one is also prevalent in the Western world. It's shame. And this one also, this is embarrassment. Yeah. This one is interest. But probably not. Usually interest has larger pupils. Pupils are dilated. That's pride. We don't know if it's universal or not. Though happiness is many different words, the expression for happiness does not vary globally. When shown posed facial expressions, each culture is best at identifying expressions from their own culture. Meta-analysis of cross-cultural studies on facial expressions, people were about 9% more accurate at identifying people from their own culture. So the people that you're used to looking at are the individuals that you identify the easiest. Adams and colleagues in 2010 had participants guess what emotions were being displayed by just showing them pictures of eyes. The participants were better at identifying emotions of culture from their own, of people from their own culture. This is dilated pupils that I was talking about before. They also noted that they showed more activity in their amygdala when they were shown eyes from people from their own culture who were demonstrating fear. The differences in facial expressions of emotions across cultures are distinct enough that people can reliably guess the nationality of targets who are expressing emotions, even though the targets are of fairly similar cultural backgrounds. An American can guess better than chance whether a target is from the United States or Australia. And of course, this is Michelle Janicki. She is a Australian hurdler. That's the only reason I wanted to show you what an Australian looks like. It's not like an Australian looks like anything else. This is what they look like. So now I'm going to show you 4 pictures of soccer people from Viterbo, women's soccer. And I want you to know that one of them is from Show Low, Arizona. And one of them is from Australia. Okay. I just showed you what an Australian looks like. There you go. Now, there you go. One of these individuals is from Show Low, and one of these individuals is from Australia. Viterbo is a Catholic college in Wisconsin. Okay. I hope you've made your decision as to which is which. Okay, first I'll show you the individual from Australia, and this is her right here. She was one of my students when I was at Ashford University. She was a soccer player and went to Viterbo. And the other one was also at Ashford University, and that is this one. The young lady is from Show Low, and she was also one of my students. The Australian was a psychology major. And of course, this is a girl from Wisconsin, and this is a girl from Wisconsin. There you go. The same researchers did a study earlier comparing Japanese participants with Japanese Americans. Results were similar to those of the Americans and the Australians. When the faces showed emotions, they were easier to read. Neutral faces were much harder to read. Baron Cohen et al. In 2001 and Krauss et al. In 2010 found that people of lower socioeconomic background more accurately identified facial expressions of emotion. The lower the status, the more individuals must attend to facial expressions so that they don't get into trouble. Different cultures will attend to different parts of the face to read expressions. The Japanese find emotions socially disruptive and thus are more likely to try to display a neutral face than Americans. But it is hard to control the muscles around the eyes, so the Japanese focus on the eyes to determine emotion. Now this gets kind of interesting because they also when they draw their cartoons, the eyes are more important than any other facial feature. As a matter of fact, sometimes they leave noses off completely. Research by Yuki et al. In 2007 attempted to determine where Japanese and American focus was when trying to read facial expressions. The Japanese read facial expressions from the eyes. Americans read facial expressions from the mouths. As weird as that sounds, and that's how we do our cartoons. European Americans are more likely to try to read the whole face than the Japanese and are more likely to include mouths prominently in their cartoon art. Japanese cartoon art shows dominant eyes and sometimes no mouths at all, as in anime. And of course, this is an American cartoon. As you can see, the mouths are fairly prominent. And here is Japanese anime, and the noses and mouths are almost completely obscured. But that's not all. This is an American cartoon, prominent mouths. This is another prominent cartoon. This is another cartoon, prominent mouths. There you go. Hello Kitty is Japanese, of course, and it has no mouth at all. And there's another one. These big eyes, but no mouths. In this case, they have no noses, but they do have tiny little slits for mouths. There's another American cartoon. Big mouths. And there's a Japanese cartoon. These two individuals are talking, and that's why they have their mouths open, but the rest of these people don't. This is something really weird in Japan. They tie handkerchiefs right under their noses, over their heads. It's just the strangest thing. Anyway, almost no noses and no mouths. Japanese cartoon. While researchers argue that all cultures have a similar capacity to read facial expressions, cultures tend to maintain varying display rules for facial expressions. Display rules are culturally specific rules that govern which facial expressions are appropriate in a given situation and how intensely they should be exhibited. Now, I just thought about this. We're talking about Japanese and the Japanese mouth and whatnot. Wait a minute. Okay. One of the things that's interesting about the Japanese is that the geisha will paint their mouth on, and it's very, very tiny. And women will very often, if they speak to you, they'll cover their mouths so that you can't see their teeth. One of the reasons is because they have created a culture where small mouths are considered to be attractive. And because of that, sometimes the teeth are crooked because they have a tiny little mouth with all those teeth in it. They have the same number of teeth as everybody else, all other humans, of course. And some of their teeth are crooked. And because of that, of course, they cover their mouths. Which might have something else to do with their cartoons, not prominent, not showing their mouths, because if you watch a Japanese movie, especially an older one that's from the 50s or 60s, they're constantly putting their hands in front of their mouths. as weird as that is. Display rules are culturally specific rules that govern which facial expressions are appropriate in a given situation and how intensely they should be exhibited. Some cultures encourage people to display their emotions in clear, if not exaggerated, form. In certain Arab populations, it is dishonorable if a man does not respond to an insult with a great demonstration of anger. Whether he plans to do anything about that anger or not isn't important. It's the fact that he screams back at you or he threatens you. He may not have any plans of following through on his threat, but this is very common in the Arab world. And for this reason, sometimes if you're listening to what's going on in the Middle East and you've got all of these Arabs that are screaming for blood, a lot of times they don't really mean that they're going to attack. What they really mean is we have to do this because that is part of our culture, is a display of anger. The Kululi of New Guinea tend to show their emotions particularly intensely and dramatically, and here they are showing their emotions that look like they're about to chop us into little pieces. Among the Alaskan native Utku, public expressions of anger are strongly condemned. Balinese have a preference for emotional smoothness, where the emphasis is on avoiding strong displays of emotional feelings for both positive and negative emotions. And this is part of the Balinese dancing, is the fact that it's very difficult to tell what's going on. You almost have to know what's going on to tell, because you can't read it from their face. Their face is theoretically always neutral, never positive and never negative. When Americans are embarrassed, they tend to make a facial expression where their face turns red, they close their eyes, and they look down. In India, when someone is embarrassed, they literally bite their tongues, an expression that is not recognized by people in the United States. And this is what it looks like, as interesting as that is. Voluntarily produced facial expressions like a wink and a false smile suggest the existence of cultural display rules that lead people to express idiosyncratic facial expressions known as ritualized displays. And you can tell the difference between a real and a fake smile by how, whether they've got lines on their eyes. There you go. This is real because he's squinting his eyes, and this isn't a real smile. Fake smile, real smile. The facial feedback hypothesis states that the expressions on our face reflects our true feelings. Strack et al. In 1988 sought to prove the hypothesis by forcing the face to form a frown or smile by holding a pencil in their mouths while watching a comedy. The researchers discovered that those in a smile mode found the humor in the comedy funnier. And we actually did this at Ashford. We did this experiment with Rugrats, the cartoon Rugrats. And I had part of the students holding their pen with their lips, and half of my class were holding the pen in their teeth. And the ones that held it in their teeth thought the Rugrats were hilarious, and the ones who were holding it with their lips, not so much. Matsumoto et al. In 1988 asked American and Japanese participants about an experience where they expressed select emotions. The Americans reported feeling those emotions longer and more intensely. Mesquita and Karasawa in 2002 had Japanese and American students complete questionnaires indicating the emotions they were experiencing a number of times during the day. The Japanese were 3 times more likely to indicate that they had no emotions than Americans. McCallums et al. In 2012 and Ryder et al. In 2008 found that East Asians are less attentive to their visceral states when compared with Westerners. Zokoto in 2010 found that Ghanaians attend to their emotions less than Americans do. From these studies, researchers have hypothesized that masking emotions in East Asia might be leading East Asians to experience fewer and less intense emotions than Americans. Research in the West has indicated that people with hostile tendencies are at an increased risk of cardiovascular disease. The reason hostility leads to cardiovascular disease is that hostile people have more occasions when they need to inhibit their anger. And the more they inhibit their anger, the more damage they do to their heart. However, in cultures where anger is not expressed, people tend to experience anger less intensely. This hypothesis was tested looking at European and Chinese Canadians. Given potentially anger-induced scenarios, the Chinese Canadians found the scenarios less anger-inducing than did the European Canadians. The most common reaction by European Canadians for the anger-provoking scenarios was to openly express their anger. For Chinese Canadians, their most common response was to reappraise the situation in a less angry way, to make efforts to distract themselves from the anger-provoking event. The European Canadians felt much anger and tried to express it openly. The Chinese Canadians adopted strategies to minimize their anger response and thus felt less angry. Now you may wonder, why are there so many Chinese in Canada? And it's because of Hong Kong. In 2000, they closed Hong Kong Hong Kong used to belong to the Brits, used to belong to the English. And for 100 years, they held on to it. From 1900 until 2000, they ran Hong Kong. Of course, Hong Kong is on the Chinese mainland, and in 2000, it reverted back to the Chinese. And in this case, the Chinese People's Republic of China. So there were a lot of people in Hong Kong who were used to more freedoms, and they decided to immigrate. And so where did they immigrate? Well, they were already English citizens, so they could immigrate openly to a commonwealth of the English Empire. So they went to Canada, as weird as that is, since it's so cold up there. And it's not that cold in Hong Kong. But that's one of the reasons why there are so many Chinese immigrants in Canada. They are full citizens of Canada, mainly because they were full citizens of the English Commonwealth. And since Canada is part of the English Commonwealth, they were able to move there without having to acquire immigrant status. The ones that came into the United States, so mostly settled in the Northwest and in the Seattle area and Portland area, different story, totally different story, because they had to come in as immigrants. Anyway, so there you go. That's why there are so many Chinese Canadians. Anderson and Lennon in 2006 measured the blood pressures of their Canadian participants. Both Chinese Canadian and European Canadian blood pressure slowly returned to baseline levels. Chinese Canadian blood pressure returned to normal faster than a European Canadian's. Chinese Canadians experienced their anger less intensely than the European Canadians, and were more comfortable with strategies that served to reduce their experience of anger, whereas the European Canadians suffered from physiological consequences if they did not openly express their anger. Compared with Americans, negative emotions in East Asians are associated with fewer negative health outcomes and less of a neural response when suppressing their emotions, indicating that it is not as effortful for them to suppress negative emotions. The English language has 2,000 different emotion words. English speakers are cued by their language to express their emotions. The Chuang of Malaysia have only 8 words that describe emotion, and only 3 represents Ekman's basic emotions: anger, shame, and fear. Now, the Malaysia is very close to Bali, for example, and of course we already know that the Balinese do not express emotions in their faces. It looks like these guys don't much either. Well, not this guy anyway. uh, Luganda speakers from Uganda do not make a distinction between sorrow and anger. The Gidjingali Aborigines of Australia use one word, Gurukach, to express both shame and fear. This is what they call a didgeridoo. It makes an interesting sound. Samoans use one word, alofa, to express both love and pity. The Utku of Alaska do not distinguish between feelings of kindness and gratitude. We've seen these tattoos before. The Ifaluk of Micronesia do not even have a word for emotion, instead lumping all internal states together. Despite the fact that English is a Germanic language, there is no equivalent word in English for the German word Schadenfreude, feelings of pleasure that one gets when witnessing the hard times of someone else. The Javanese have a term iklas, which refers to somewhat pleasant feeling caused by frustration. In Japanese, ame captures the relatively pleasant feelings that one experiences when allowed to emphasize his or her dependence on one another. It often involves the tendencies to behave inappropriately toward a close other as a gesture to demonstrate how secure the relationship is. It's kind of like codependency, actually, and it can be fairly destructive. Uchida et al. In 2009 compared the emotional responses from athletes after an Olympic victory. Comparing Japanese and U.S. statements, the researchers determined that the Japanese feel especially good when they're focusing on how their emotional experiences led them to connect with others. Americans feel especially good when they're dwelling on those emotional experiences that distinguish them from others. So the Japanese want to be like everybody else, and the Americans want to be unique. In 2013, Oishi and colleagues examined dictionaries for the definition of happiness in 30 countries. They found that luck, and that's what this symbol is. This is a symbol of good luck from China. Found that luck was included in the definition in all but the United States, Spain, Argentina, Ecuador, India, and Kenya. And if you go to a Chinese restaurant, you'll see one of these cats with their arm up, and it means, and this says luck, good luck. People who live in countries where happiness is defined as good luck report feeling less happy than those where luck is not seen as an important part of the definition. Wow. Looking at the definitions across time in the United States, in the U.S. dictionaries, the researchers discovered that the definition of happiness included the concept of good luck until 1961. And this is what was going on in 1961. Subjective well-being is the feeling of how satisfied one is with one's life. The nations that score the highest on subjective well-being are Scandinavian and Nordic countries, much of Latin America, various English-speaking countries, and Western Europe. And these guys are from Norway, I think. Or no, that's Denmark, I'm sorry. That's the Danish flag. The least subjectively happy people are people of the former Soviet republics and some of the impoverished countries in Africa and South Asia. And this is, of course, these guys are Ukrainian. That's a Ukrainian flag. They did a similar study of the regions in the United States and found that the Mountain West and New England had the highest subjective well-being. The area with the lowest subjective well-being was the Southeast. And of course, that's where civil rights was, that's where Jim Crow was prevalent. Many factors contribute to the overall satisfaction that people have with their lives. One is wealth. People who live in countries in which they have access to enough wealth to easily meet the basic needs of life tend to be considerably more satisfied than those who do not. Looking at the history of subjective well-being, once a country has an average gross domestic product of at least 40% of that of the United States, there is no longer any pronounced relation between money and subjective well-being. Money can buy a lot of happiness if you're struggling to survive. However, it has much less impact if your basic needs have been met. This is an interesting word right here. This Diener is how that's pronounced. It's a German word that means helper or servant. When I was doing autopsies, when I was working in the laboratory and doing autopsies, the person that assisted the pathologist was called a Diener, and that's how you spelled it. Those countries that promote human rights the most tend to have the happiest citizens. Those countries in which people live under the constant threat of being thrown in jail for suspicions of plotting against the government are not as happy. The overall equality among people in a country is associated with greater subjective well-being. And the reason he has his hands up like that is because Ethiopia has a problem with human rights, and they arrest some people, and of course that's the symbol of being arrested. The Scandinavian and Nordic nations have various social policies to minimize differences and opportunities among its citizens. These nations have some of the happiest citizens in the world. It seems people feel good when their rights are not threatened, and they have opportunities that are comparable to those of their neighbors. People in individualistic societies were far more likely than those in collectivist societies to base their life satisfaction on how many positive emotions they are experiencing. Positive emotions appear to be seen as the basis of a good life in individualistic societies. Oishi in 2002 looked at how Asian American and European Americans interpreted their past. Oishi had people record the week they were having and then asked them to remember the week. While the two groups had similar weeks, the European Americans remembered their week as more positive than it actually was. The Asian Americans remembered their week accurately. Follow-up research by Rogers and colleagues in 2004 found that European Americans appear to be operating under an implicit theory that they should be happy. Asian Americans seem to operate under the theory that emotional experience should be balanced and consist of both positive and negative experiences. And we have been debating this actually a lot more here lately. The question, I read an article the other day that was talking about why do we feel like we have to be happy all the time? It was a little odd. Researchers feel that it is quite possible that many of the observed cultural differences in subjective well-being are based on the different theories that people from different cultures have about how they should be feeling about their lives. In a study by Falk et al. In 2010, Canadian students were asked to choose between a video game that was fun and one that boosted thinking skills. The results indicated that European Canadians were more likely to choose the fun game, whereas Asian Canadians were more likely to choose the useful game. In the same study, students were asked to select university courses from a fictitious set of course descriptions. European Canadians were more likely to choose the courses that sounded like fun and interesting compared with Asian Canadians, who focused more on the perceived utility of the courses. This is really kind of interesting because when I was at Ashford, I had a student from Bangladesh, and he took my class. He took my class and really enjoyed it. It was the Gen Psych class, and he really enjoyed it. At the time he was a math and computer major, and he wasn't having any fun in math and computers. But of course, as an Asian, because of Bangladesh is in South Asia, It's on the Indian Peninsula. It's just off the Indian Peninsula. Uh, because he was Asian, of course, he felt like he needed to be doing something that was functional, was purposeful, and psychology was just too much fun. But so eventually he decided, well, okay, but computers and math are just not exciting enough for me. I think that I'll change my major. And he did. He changed it to environmental science. And he was in environmental science for a couple semesters, and then he just couldn't stand it anymore. He took a couple more classes from me, and they seemed so much more fun. He decided to become a psychology major, and he did. He became a psychology major, graduated with a bachelor's degree in psychology, and then he went off to graduate school. And so, what did he study? He studied industrial organizational psychology, which is probably the stiffest of all the different branches of psychology that you could take. It was just kind of fascinating to watch him, changing from being well, he always will be an East Asian, but or South Asian actually, uh, but trying to adapt to being more American. And now he's a college professor at Valdosta State. I should probably call him because Valdosta got blasted by Hurricane Helene. The last time I talked to him, he couldn't go back into his apartment because he didn't have any electricity. But that was about, I don't know, 10 days ago or so. I guess I should call him. But I'm doing this. Asian Canadians seem less interested in the idea of doing things for the sake of anticipated positive feelings compared with the European Canadians. And of course, my student was the same way. Life appears to be less about a pursuit of happiness for people with Asian cultural experiences than it does for Westerners. European Americans report experiencing many positive emotions and less depression. East Asians who report having many positive emotions are no less at risk for depression than those East Asians who report having very few positive emotions. Positive feelings do not seem to carry the same protection against depression in East Asia. Grossman and Cross in 2010 investigated Russian and American personalities through vignettes and discovered that Russians were more likely to identify with the stereotype of the Russian brooder than were Americans. Brooding is like pouting. It's thinking deeply and not having positive thoughts. It's this guy, and it's this lady, and it's this lady, and potentially this guy. Reflective Americans were more prone to depression, but Russian brooders tended toward less depression because they're ruminating, but they're not ruminating about negative things, especially. They they think negatively all the time anyway. I don't know if you've ever had a Russian friend or talked to a Russian. They're really kind of interesting. Don't ask them a question. They will give you. They're funny because they'll give you advice even if you don't ask for it, even if you don't, especially if you don't want it. They're really kind of interesting, and they are blunt. They are so blunt. Brooding over negative emotions, while common in Russia, does not lead to Russians being depressed as it does for Americans. And you can see these people are not happy. Tsai and colleagues in 2006 proposed the notion of ideal affect, the kinds of feelings that people desire. They are the emotions that people are trying to achieve, so they structure their lives in order to increase the likelihood that they will experience these emotions. For most Americans, ideal affect contains positive emotions that are high in arousal, whereas for East Asians, ideal affect contains positive emotions that are low in arousal. Tsai et al. In 2006 looked at children's storybooks and found that American storybooks showed faces that were excited and had bigger smiles than the storybooks for children in Taiwan. And these are children from Taiwan, obviously. The researchers discovered that European American preschool children preferred pictures of excited faces more than the Taiwanese preschoolers did. And they also felt more similar to the characters who were engaged in high arousal activities. The Taiwanese children felt more similar to the characters engaged in low arousal activities. Looking at the Gospels of the Bible and Buddhist texts, of course, Buddhism is prevalent in Asia. Miao and Sepla in 2007 found that high arousal states were encouraged more in the Christian texts, whereas low arousal states were encouraged more in Buddhist texts. And that's why these people are meditating. Some Christian sects include enthusiastic religious practices such as jumping, shouting, and applause, and obviously rattlesnake handling. Buddhist religion, this isn't all that common. It's only common in areas of up in the mountains in Tennessee. Buddhist religious practices emphasize meditation and calming of one's mind, which isn't going to take place with snakes. This guy's got one too. This is weird. European Americans are more likely to engage in active individual activities such as jogging and rollerblading, whereas Asian Americans are more likely to pursue more passive activities such as sightseeing and picnicking. It's so weird. We went to Hawaii. We've been to Hawaii a couple times, but Hawaii used to be almost completely owned by the Japanese because they bought all the hotels and whatnot. But it was really kind of interesting. The last time we were there, we were on Waikiki Beach, and right around the corner from Waikiki is Diamond Head. And so me and my kids and I, we decided we would jog up to Diamond Head. It was really kind of interesting. We jogged up to Diamond Head, and there were all of these Japanese tourists and Chinese tourists, especially Japanese tourists, and this is what they were doing. They were all just taking pictures and standing around and taking a lot of pictures of this and taking pictures of that. It was just so weird. They would jump in a bus and they would travel to some place, jump out and start taking pictures almost right away. But you didn't see them moving around hardly at all. For them, a vacation is to sit and have somebody transport you someplace. Really weird. Well, I thought it was. And here, my kids and I, we were going out swimming, and my son surfs, and we were doing all these physical things, and even the younger Japanese people, you couldn't get them to do more than sit in a chair. European Americans are more likely to prefer fast tempo and exciting music, whereas Chinese are more likely to prefer calm music, and that, of course, is Quiet Riot. I would click on this and show you the video, but if I do that, then I can't. The video gets locked up because of copyright. So if you click on any of this, that you'll get the Quiet Riot. Come Feel the Noise. These two individuals have died of drug overdoses, by the way. I thought that was kind of interesting. Among Westerners, interpersonally disengaging acts feel especially good. Subjective well-being is associated with positive feelings. People operate under the implicit theory that more positive feelings are better. Positive emotions serve as a bulwark against depression, and high arousal positive emotions are preferred. Yay! Among East Asians, interpersonally engaging acts feel especially good. Subjective well-being is associated with appropriate role behaviors. People operate under the implicit theory that it is good to experience both positive and negative feelings. Positive emotions are not associated with less depression, and lower arousal positive emotions are more sought after. And if you want to, okay, so the point was in this lecture, and if I did this in the classroom, of course, I wouldn't have to worry about it. But I showed you Quiet Riot, Come Feel the Noise. And then if you click on this X right here, you'll go to the top 10 songs in Japan in, I don't know, 2010 or something. Anyway, you'll see the difference between the Japanese music and the American music. That is the end of the. So if you want to see those two things, it's just open it up and click on the X in this case, and the purple, all the purple stuff. But I can't do it because they will block my video for copyright, because of copyright laws. Okay, that's chapter 10.